And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we're going to use the pastry cream that we made last week to fill these amazing yeast donuts. Pretty simple recipe, does take a little bit of work and a little bit of finesse on the amount of kneading that they get. But we are going to make these amazing donuts. You don't need a deep fryer, but it helps. You can always just do this in cast iron, but here's our ingredients. So we've got some milk, some sugar, egg yolks, some instant yeast, you can also use active dry, a little bit of salt. We're going to put a little bit of orange blossom water and a bunch of all-purpose flour in there as well. So the first thing we're going to do is mix our dry ingredients together. So in goes the flour, and a little unusually, we're actually going to be adding the sugar into the flour. Sugar is usually treated as a wet ingredient, in fact, but we're adding it in with our flour for this recipe. So that's going to go into our stand mixer. We're going to add in our yeast, and then we are also going to add in the salt. Typically, you don't add in the salt on top of the yeast because they won't interact well, but as long as the yeast is still dry, it's not going to hurt it too much, and we do need the salt in there. So if you're using active dry yeast, you're going to want to bloom that first in probably the milk. So add some of the sugar to the milk, make sure it's warm, let it bloom for a little while until it's nice and foamy, and then add it in. For instant yeast, it shouldn't need to bloom, so you can just add it right into your dry ingredients. So we're going to get the dough hook working on this a little bit, and just until it's well combined, you want to, scrape down the sides at least once while this is going. But we still have a bunch of things to add to this, so we're just trying to get it combined here. And let that go for a little while. Then we're going to add in our egg yolks. We're just using the yolks for this. And then we're going to add in that orange blossom water, which adds this really beautiful sort of very gentle aroma to the dough as it fries and as you're eating it. It really makes it quite lovely. And you can see here it's not well combined yet. There's still big chunks of everything, but you do want to make sure you're scraping down the sides every so often because you want to make sure that there's no bits stuck to the outside that need to get mixed in. So a good, firm, strong scraper and get it all mixed in. You can see that little bit of flour at the bottom. Don't worry about that. As this mixes, it will sort of work its way into the rest of the dough. And then we're going to get that on there. And you can see even now the hook is kneading the dough against the side of the bowl here. And if you're using a stand mixer, you can really tell when it stops mixing and starts kneading, because it'll make a different noise as it's pressing the dough against the side and the dough is resisting a little bit. Now you can see the bottom of the dough is stuck to the bottom of the mixer. We're just going to give it a little test here. It's still very sticky, and it's not really resisting, or it's not springing back when we touch it. So it's coming together, but it's not ready yet. So we're just going to keep that going for a little while until it gets to this stage. And you can see here it bounces back, it springs back a little when you apply pressure, and it's no longer sticky on the outside. Now we didn't add any extra flour to this, but as it needs, the flour will absorb all of the moisture from all of your wet ingredients. It'll hydrate itself, and it will become less sticky. It'll make that sort of skin on the outside almost. It is still quite sticky, but as you can see, it's way less sticky than it was before. And this is all mixed together. You don't want to overmix this, or they will become kind of tough and bready. But this is about right. So what we're going to do next is give it just a little bit of oil on the outside. So get some oil on your hand. And then we're just going to give it a gentle massage and try and get all of it off of the side of the bowl. And you can put it back in the same bowl. You don't have to worry about those little bits stuck on the side. That's fine. Not ideal, but not going to hurt everything in the long run. We're just going to cover that with a clean, dry towel until it's doubled inside. So that's the proofing. So we're going to proof that until it is really nice and fluffy, big air bubbles in there, and then turn that out onto a floured work surface. And we add that oil on the outside just so it doesn't dry out and get that sort of crispy shell on the outside. So what we're going to do now is we're going to roll this out and cut it into our donut shapes. And you want to roll it to anywhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch thick. And this recipe we found gave us just about 12 donuts. I mean, depending on the size that you make them, you want to get a nice floured cookie cutter or ring mold with a good sharp edge on the bottom and give it a little twist. And try and make it as efficient as you can space-wise so that you don't have a lot of waste. You're always going to end up with some if you're cutting round shapes because there's only so much you can do. And we're going to transfer that onto a parchment-lined baking sheet or cookie tray here, or cookie sheet. And we're going to take all of our little reject bits, all of our little scraps that were remaining from around the circles, and roll that together. Now, this little bit is not going to be ideal because it's mostly made up of sort of chunks that didn't stick together or that were sticking back together. So, as you're putting it back together, it is going to feel a little overworked. They're probably not going to be nice even shapes or anything. And we also turned the last little bit into a ball there. So this has to proof again. Now that they've cut, we're going to cover them with plastic wrap, and those are going to sit for about 45 minutes until they puff up a little bit. They don't need to double in size this time. They are going to puff up a lot in the fryer. I promise you're going to see in just a second here. So into the fryer they go. Now the fryer is really easy because it lets you really maintain that temperature very easily. And you can see how much they are just puffing right up. Now, a couple of them didn't, we found that actually about half of them didn't puff up quite as much as the other half, which we found odd. Maybe just a distribution of ingredients, we're not entirely sure, but you can see the ones that puffed up really puffed up a lot. The ones that didn't puff up as much still were, nice and light, but they weren't quite as ridiculously airy as the ones that, as you can see here, just expanded so much really quickly. So we're going to take those out once they're nice and brown on both sides, cooked all the way through. And while they're still warm or hot, warm is fine, that's okay. We're going to dip it in just a little bit of plain sugar. Depending on what you're filling it with, you can use cinnamon sugar for that, but we're using this chocolate pastry cream, so we didn't want to add a whole bunch of other flavors on the outside. We really wanted the chocolate to speak for itself, so we cut a little gap in there and cut it open on the inside so that there was room for our pastry cream. Now this is ideal with a smaller tip than the one we've got here, but this is what we had on hand. And there you go, we just fill it with that pastry cream. It was nice and stiff, that chocolate pastry cream. It came out really well. This was absolutely delicious, really sweet, but we do recommend that you have some friends over. They're better fresh, so, make a bunch of donuts and have some friends over to try them out. And that's it. That's the whole thing. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks again to our patrons. I'll put a link in the description below for anyone who would like to support the channel. And remember to love your food.